What's really happening with Iran War Day 21? Here's what nobody is saying. 3 weeks into the largest Middle Eastern conflict since 2003, 6 of the world's 9 nuclear powers are now aligned on opposing sides. The Pentagon has requested $200 billion in emergency funding. Oil has touched $119 a barrel. And somewhere in the rubble of what used to be Iran's nuclear infrastructure, a question is forming that nobody in Washington or Tel Aviv wants to answer. What happens when you destroy everything, and the regime is still standing? Let's establish what we actually know as of March 21, 2026. The United States and Israel have conducted the most intensive air campaign in modern Middle Eastern history. U.S. Central Command reports over 7,800 targets struck across Iran. More than 8,000 combat sorties flown in 21 days. To put that in perspective, during the entire first month of the 2003 Iraq invasion, coalition forces flew roughly 40,000 sorties total. We're approaching that pace against a country 3 times the size, with far more sophisticated air defenses. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu claims Iran has lost its uranium enrichment capability entirely. Quote, "Iran today has no capability to enrich uranium and no capability to produce ballistic missiles." That's an extraordinary claim, one that Iran immediately disputed, insisting missile production continues. Here's what makes this moment different from any conflict we've analyzed before. On day 1 of this war, Iran launched roughly 390 missiles and 600 drones in a single coordinated strike. Not against Israel alone, but simultaneously targeting the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Bahrain. 6 nations hit in hours. That's not a defensive response. That's a regional war declaration. And it's working, at least economically. Brent crude peaked at $119 per barrel. American gas prices have climbed to $3.68 per gallon. Diesel is up 34% since the war began. The Pentagon now pays an additional $1.3 billion for every $10 increase in oil prices. President Trump declared Iran's military, air defense, navy, and leadership structure are, quote, gone. He stated there's nobody to talk to for negotiations. In the same breath, he suggested he may wind down the Iran war and let others police the region. That contradiction between total victory claims and exit planning tells you everything about where this conflict actually stands. The military picture is simultaneously impressive and incomplete. The coalition has achieved tactical dominance. That's not spin, it's arithmetic. 90% reduction in Iranian missile launches. 75% of mobile launchers destroyed. The IRGC's ability to project conventional power has been functionally eliminated. Fordow and Natanz, Iran's primary enrichment facilities, have been largely destroyed since the June 2025 strikes in Operation Midnight Hammer. Israel struck a key Iranian natural gas field on March 19th. The coalition hit Qatar's largest gas facility in retaliation strikes, cutting 17% of global LNG exports overnight. This is industrial-scale warfare against energy infrastructure, and both sides are playing it. But here's the first thing nobody's saying. On March 15th, a U.S. F-35 stealth fighter was struck over Iranian airspace and forced to conduct an emergency landing. This is the first combat loss of an F-35 in the aircraft's history. The official explanation mentions mechanical factors and degraded conditions. The unofficial concern circulating in defense circles, Russian intelligence sharing, satellite data, signals intelligence, targeting information. Russia has every incentive to help Iran impose costs on American power projection without directly engaging. We cannot confirm the extent of this cooperation, but we can confirm that American aircraft are now operating in an environment where stealth advantages may be compromised. The ground picture is escalating. 3 amphibious assault ships and approximately 2,500 Marines are deploying to the Middle East with the stated mission of securing the Strait of Hormuz. This represents a fundamental shift. Air campaigns can destroy. Only ground forces can hold. The introduction of boots-on-ground operations signals that Washington believes this conflict will not end quickly. regardless of what the president says publicly. Now let's map the strategic weight of each actor, because the balance here is unlike anything in modern geopolitical history. The United States brings overwhelming firepower, global logistics, and financial depth. But Trump's top general has warned of supply shortages for a quick victory. The $200 billion funding request tells you the Pentagon sees a longer conflict than the White House is advertising. American advantages are real, but finite. Israel brings precision, intelligence penetration, and existential motivation. The Mossad has demonstrated extraordinary reach, eliminating IRGC intelligence chiefs, targeting Supreme National Security Council Secretary Ali Larijani, reportedly conducting special operations at nuclear sites. But Israel cannot sustain this tempo indefinitely. Their economy, their reserves, their population, all are stretched. Iran brings something neither Washington nor Tel Aviv fully anticipated: resilience. After Supreme Leader Khamenei's killing, analysts expected regime fracture, defections, internal chaos. Instead, hardline IRGC elements consolidated control. No large-scale defections materialized. The security apparatus responded not by collapsing, but by intensifying domestic control. IRGC intelligence is sending surveillance warnings via text message to citizens active on opposition social media. Multiple arrest waves are targeting anti-regime networks. Internet blackouts limit information flow. This is a regime that was built to survive exactly this kind of pressure. And then there's the alliance structure that should terrify strategic planners in every Western capital. Russia and North Korea are backing China in opposition to US-led forces. China is aligning with this bloc while watching Taiwan. India and Pakistan, already nuclear-armed rivals, are drifting toward opposing sides in this conflict. France is leading a European bloc toward deeper nuclear-integrated security arrangements. 6 of 9 nuclear powers, aligned on opposite sides, in an active shooting war. This is not the Cold War's bipolar stability. This is something we haven't seen since 1914. Interlocking alliance commitments that could cascade beyond anyone's control. Now, here's the hidden factor. The strategic dynamic that almost nobody is discussing. The air campaign has succeeded tactically while failing strategically, and both Washington and Tel Aviv know it. Professor Miran Kamrava frames it perfectly. The United States and Israel are fighting to achieve decisive victory. Iran is fighting to survive long enough to call survival a victory. These are fundamentally incompatible war logics. Netanyahu is publicly calling for conditions that might spark an Iranian uprising. That's an implicit admission that air power alone cannot achieve regime change. Iran is demanding compensation for civilian damage while maintaining defiant rhetoric. A classic negotiating posture that signals openness to talks while preserving domestic credibility. Meanwhile, Iran's proxy network shows mixed resilience. Lebanese Hezbollah has launched 522 attack waves on Israel since March 2nd, 362 rocket and missile strikes, 143 drone attacks. That's dozens daily, sustained for 3 weeks. An attrition strategy designed to exhaust Israeli air defenses and civilian tolerance. Iraqi militias continue claiming drone and missile attacks on U.S. bases, including Victory Base near Baghdad. Hamas is catastrophically degraded. Their key IRGC liaison was killed in June 2025. Houthi stockpiles are reduced, but the network still functions. Degraded is not destroyed. Here's what this means. The coalition is winning every battle and may still lose the war. Not because Iran can defeat American and Israeli forces militarily. It cannot. But because the strategic objective, eliminating Iran as a regional threat, requires either regime change or a negotiated surrender, and neither is achievable through air power alone. The current trajectory leads to a grinding, indefinite conflict that Iran believes it can outlast. Every week that passes with the regime still standing is a week that proves their survival narrative correct. Let me tell you what this means for you, whether you're watching from Detroit, London, Singapore, or Sao Paulo. First, investment signals. Energy producers and defense contractors are the obvious hedges against prolonged conflict. But watch for something less obvious. Fertilizer shortages threatening spring planting season. Agricultural commodities may spike in the next 60 to 90 days regardless of whether the war ends. The supply chains are already disrupted. Gold and silver dropped 3% in initial trading as risk assets sold off. But sustained conflict historically drives safe haven demand. If this extends past April, precious metals likely recover. Bitcoin is facing pressure as a risk asset, contrary to its theoretical inflation hedge narrative. That's useful data about how markets actually treat crypto in crisis conditions. Avoid cyclical consumer sectors, transportation, retail, anything dependent on stable fuel costs. The 34% diesel increase flows directly through supply chains into prices you pay for everything. Second, geopolitical indicators for the next 90 days. Watch the Strait of Hormuz above all else. Iranian mining attempts versus coalition patrols. Any successful blockade pushes oil toward $150 per barrel and forces immediate negotiation. That's the trigger point. Watch Trump's 4 to 6 week timeline. The White House confirmed at week 3 that they believe they're on track. Mid-April marks the deadline. If fighting continues past that window without clear victory, expect policy shifts or rhetorical repositioning. Watch Gulf ally statements. Qatar's prime minister has already called for stopping the war. If Kuwait or UAE join that chorus, it signals regional fatigue with American strategy that could force diplomatic pivots. Third, practical impact on daily life. Gas prices will likely remain elevated through April minimum. Budget accordingly. Supply chain disruptions will hit consumer goods in waves over the next 2 to 3 months. The shipping delays are already locked in. If you're in Europe, watch natural gas prices closely. That 17% LNG export cut from the Qatar strike reverberates directly through European energy markets. Fourth, a framework for thinking about this. When great powers fight wars with limited objectives, they optimize for quick, decisive victories. When regional powers fight wars for survival, they optimize for endurance. These strategies are asymmetric in ways that favor the defender over time, unless the attacker is willing to escalate to occupation and regime change. Ask yourself with any future conflict, what is each side actually optimizing for? That question predicts outcomes better than body counts or territorial control. So what happens next? Let me give you 3 concrete scenarios. Scenario 1, highest probability, extended attritional war. Iran's regime continues functioning in degraded capacity. Coalition airstrikes continue with diminishing marginal returns. Proxy attacks persist at reduced but sustainable levels. Oil remains between $95 and $110 per barrel. No negotiated settlement emerges. This becomes a frozen conflict with periodic escalation cycles, lasting into late 2026 or beyond. This is the path we're currently on, absent major change. Scenario 2, moderate probability. Economic pressure forces negotiations. Sustained high energy prices shrink Gulf state GDPs. Kuwait and Qatar face 14% contraction if war continues through April. Global GDP growth drops 0.3%. The economic pain becomes intolerable for all parties. The U.S. extends temporary sanction relief on Iranian oil sales past the April 19th deadline. Back-channel talks emerge. Some face-saving framework allows both sides to claim victory. Oil drops to $85. Markets rally. Nobody actually solves the underlying conflict. They just pause it. Scenario 3. Lower probability. Escalation toward decisive action. Trump and Netanyahu interpret battlefield success as evidence that one more push achieves regime collapse. Ground operations expand beyond Hormuz security. Iran responds with its remaining asymmetric capabilities. The conflict widens to include direct engagement with Iran-aligned Iraqi militias. Regional allies face pressure to choose sides explicitly. Escalation spirals into something larger than anyone intended. The variable that determines which scenario materializes is simple. Who blinks first? Iran believes it can outlast American political will. America believes it can outlast Iranian material capability. One of them is wrong. By mid-April, we'll have a much clearer answer. 21 days into this war, we've witnessed the most intensive air campaign against a major regional power in decades. We've seen 6 nuclear nations align on opposite sides of an active conflict. We've watched energy markets spike, alliances fracture, and strategic assumptions shatter. What nobody is saying, what the tactical victory laps and the defiant rhetoric both obscure, is that neither side has a clear path to the outcome they actually need. Iran cannot defeat the coalition. The coalition cannot make Iran submit through air power alone. And in that gap between capability and objective, between destruction and resolution, lies the most dangerous territory in international relations, the space where wars don't end, they just continue.